They hit him with handcuffs so hard it left a bruise on his wrist before the police even said his name out loud. That's how Jamal Carter, a quiet 45-year-old janitor who had scrubbed the marble floors of Hamilton and Price law firm for nearly 2 decades, was dragged into the world of accusations and humiliation. To the men with badges, he wasn't a dedicated worker or a father who never missed a night shift. He was simply a black man they claimed had stolen something too valuable to forgive. The sirens outside screamed as neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering and pointing while Jamal's only daughter, Layla, stood barefoot on the porch in her pajamas. She was just 14, with braids still damp from the shower, clutching her worn school notebook to her chest like it was armor. She watched her father shoved into the back seat of a cruiser and didn't know whether to cry or scream. That night shattered the fragile peace in their neighborhood. Everyone knew Jamal. He was the man who shoveled snow off the elderly widow's steps, who patched the basketball nets for the kids at the park. His only crime before this was working too hard for too little. And yet, the story spreading through downtown Detroit was that Jamal had stolen confidential merger files from the very firm that signed his paychecks. The accusations were ridiculous. Jamal never had access to locked filing rooms, never even touched a computer without permission. But the firm claimed they had key card logs showing his ID was used in restricted areas the night documents disappeared. More damning, they said the security cameras covering that hallway mysteriously failed just at the right moment. It didn't take long for Jamal to understand he was a scapegoat. He also understood that in court, poor black men rarely got the benefit of doubt. His court-appointed lawyer, a man with crumpled suits and coffee-stained files, met him once in the holding cell and muttered that things didn't look good. For Layla, the shock of that night turned into something sharper. While other teenagers were thinking about dances and Instagram likes, she was memorizing the difference between probable cause and reasonable doubt. She had already been sneaking into her father's workplace library for years, spending late nights curled up on the carpet with thick law books while her father mopped nearby. She had devoured pages of case law the way some kids devour comic books. Her father used to tease that she was going to out-argue the judges themselves one day. Now, with her father's freedom on the line, the joke felt like prophecy. 2 days after the arrest, she stood in the visiting room at Wayne County Jail. The smell of disinfectant stung her nose. The flickering light above made everything look gray. Jamal's eyes were tired, but when he saw her, he tried to smile. "Pumpkin, don't you worry about me," he said, his voice hoarse. "Just keep going. To school." But Layla shook her head. Her voice trembled, but her words were iron. "I'm not letting them do this to you." "If no one else fights, I will." Her father chuckled bitterly. "Baby, you're 14. You can't walk into that courtroom. Watch me." Those 2 words hung in the stale air like a spark ready to ignite. When the preliminary hearing came, reporters barely noticed the teenage girl in a thrift store blazer sitting behind her father. But the entire room froze when she stood up beside the weary public defender and announced she was requesting to act as co-counsel. The judge, a stern man with a polished gavel and colder eyes, barked a laugh. "Miss Carter, this is not a debate team competition. Sit down." But Layla didn't flinch. She pulled out a yellowed paperback of Michigan court rules, underlined and dog-eared, and quoted the section about ineffective assistance of counsel. She pointed out that the assigned attorney had spoken to her father for less than 10 minutes before this hearing, hardly a defense. She went further, raising the issue of the judge's impartiality, because everyone in Detroit knew that Judge Randall Price was the cousin of the firm's senior partner, the very man accusing Jamal. Gasps filled the room. The judge's face flushed crimson. For the first time, the gallery of clerks and lawyers started whispering, realizing this teenager wasn't there to play games. The prosecutor sneered, calling it nonsense. But Layla calmly cited precedent after precedent, including a state case where a minor was permitted to argue motions under special circumstances. She asked, her voice unwavering. "If the truth is all we want here, why does my age matter more than the facts?" The judge leaned back, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. He finally said he would consider her request only if she passed an oral exam proving she understood the law. The courtroom chuckled, but Layla's chin lifted high. "Give me the exam," she said. That moment spread like wildfire. By the time she returned home that evening, social media had exploded with clips of the teen lawyer standing up to the court. Some mocked her, others called her a genius. But in the Carter household, it was deadly serious. Bills were piling up, Jamal's job was gone, and the entire neighborhood buzzed with judgment and sympathy in equal measure. Late into the night, Layla spread her notebooks across the kitchen table. She whispered definitions to herself. Mens rea, mental state of intent. Brady doctrine, prosecutor's duty to disclose her mother, long gone from their lives, had left no guidance. It was just her and her father, and she was determined not to let him disappear behind bars. The injustice burned her. She knew the firm had always treated janitors like invisible shadows, the kind of people who clean up messes no one else wants to admit making. She remembered overhearing executives joke about background furniture when referring to the black staff. And now those same men were ready to throw her father away as if he were nothing. The next morning, she walked to school carrying not just textbooks, but legal dictionaries. Teachers whispered in the hallway. Classmates who used to tease her for being the nerdy girl with no friends now stared in awe or doubt. Layla ignored them all. She was preparing not just for exams, but for war. Meanwhile, Jamal sat alone in his cell, replaying the events of that night. He knew he hadn't swiped his card into those rooms. He was mopping the lobby at the time. But when he thought about the smirk on Bradley Holt, the head of security, a chill ran down his spine. Holt was the only one with administrative access to the key card system, and Holt had never hidden his contempt for black workers. Jamal remembered too clearly the night Holt told him, "Guys like you should be grateful we even let you clean this place." Jamal knew what Layla was risking. He feared that the system would chew her up and laugh at her the same way it had laughed at him. But there was also something fierce in her eyes, something he hadn't seen since his late wife marched in protests years ago. It was the fire of a girl who refused to be silent. The oral exam was set for Friday morning. Reporters packed the benches, eager to see a teenager crash and burn. Layla walked in wearing the same blazer, too big for her shoulders, her braids tied back neatly. She carried nothing but a small notebook and a confidence that rattled even the most seasoned lawyers. When the judge began firing questions about burden of proof, admissibility of evidence, and double jeopardy, the room buzzed with disbelief as Layla answered fluently, citing rules and applying them to her father's case. She explained why evidence obtained under suspicion of tampering should be excluded. She dissected the chain of custody errors with the precision of someone twice her age. By the time she finished, the judge's gavel tapped not in anger but in reluctant approval. "Very well," he muttered. "You may serve as co-counsel. But remember, this court is not a classroom." The gallery erupted in murmurs, some cheering, some scoffing. Jamal's eyes glistened with pride and fear all at once. His little girl had just forced open a door that had been slammed in their faces. As they left the courthouse, microphones swarmed. "Layla, how does it feel to defend your father? Do you really think you can win?" She didn't smile. She didn't pose. She simply said, "I believe in the truth. And the truth doesn't care how old I am." The crowd fell silent for a beat before the questions resumed. But her words lingered, echoing louder than any gavel. The battle had only just begun, and everyone watching knew this wasn't just a family's fight anymore. It was a confrontation with a system that had betrayed them for generations. The courtroom became a battlefield where every word carried the weight of freedom or condemnation. Once Layla was officially allowed to act as co-counsel, she moved with a seriousness that startled even her father. Reporters came daily, some mocking the idea of a kid lawyer, others admiring her audacity. But none of them saw the endless nights she spent at the kitchen table, eyes bloodshot, whispering legal definitions until dawn while her father prayed silently in his cell. The prosecution thought it would be easy. They leaned on the evidence, the keycard records, the missing merger files supposedly worth millions, and the suspicious timing of Jamal's presence in the building. But Layla wasn't content to react. She attacked. Her first move was bold. She filed a motion demanding the disclosure of all digital evidence, including the corrupted security footage. She cited case law like it was second nature, insisting that withholding the full data violated constitutional rights. The judge tried to downplay her motion, but she refused to sit down. If the state claims my father's guilt rests on technology, then we have a right to examine every line of code, every second of footage. Otherwise, this trial isn't about justice. It's about control. The gallery stirred. The prosecutor rolled his eyes but knew she had a point. The judge begrudgingly allowed the request, though with limitations. It was a small victory, but one that gave Layla momentum. Cross-examination day arrived, and Layla faced Bradley Holt, the head of security. He swaggered onto the stand, clean-shaven with a stiff suit, eyes glinting with arrogance. This was the man Jamal had always suspected. Layla approached slowly, her voice soft but precise. "Mr. Holt, can you confirm that you were present at the firm during the alleged theft?" "Yes," he said confidently. "Are you sure?" "Of course." "I always check the systems." Layla tilted her head. "Funny, because the logbook from that night shows you signed in nearly an hour late. Would you like me to show it to you?" A ripple of laughter spread through the gallery. Holt stiffened, stammering that it must have been a clerical error. She pressed harder. "You also have administrator access to the keycard database, don't you?" "Yes, but..." "So you could theoretically alter or insert entries?" He faltered. "That's not what happened." Layla's tone sharpened. "And yet, my father's card was logged in 2 places at once. Once in the basement where he was cleaning, and once in the restricted file room. Can you explain how a man can be in 2 places at once?" The silence in the courtroom was heavy. Holt fumbled, offering excuses about system glitches. But Layla wasn't done. She produced bank records showing a suspicious $12,000 deposit into Holt's account days after the documents vanished. She held them up for the judge. "If Mr. Holt can't explain this deposit, perhaps we should ask who paid him to look the other way." Gasps erupted. The prosecutor objected furiously, but the damage was done. Holt's face turned crimson, sweat forming at his temples. For the first time, Jamal saw the tide shift. But Layla knew this was bigger than Holt. She dug deeper, uncovering that another janitor, Ms. Anna Reyes, had been told by management to take that night off, though she never requested leave. When subpoenaed, Anna hesitated, trembling as she took the stand. But with tears in her eyes, she admitted that she had been pressured to stay silent. Someone from the firm had slipped her an envelope of cash, warning her that if she talked, she'd never work in the city again. The courtroom buzzed with outrage. The picture of corruption was becoming clearer. Executives covering their tracks, using Holt to manipulate records and scapegoating the easiest target, the black janitor who had no power to fight back. Still, the prosecution doubled down. They painted Jamal as disgruntled, suggesting he had been overheard complaining about long hours and low pay. They hinted he had motive. They tried to twist Layla's late-night study sessions in the firm's library into evidence of her father's inside access. Layla refused to let the smear campaign stand. "Yes, I studied in that library," she admitted openly, "because I believed knowledge was free to anyone willing to reach for it. My father didn't steal documents. He gave me the gift of opportunity. And now you want to turn that into a crime." Her words pierced the room. Even the jurors leaned forward, visibly moved. But behind closed doors, Layla wrestled with exhaustion. She was still a teenager, still juggling algebra homework and whispered gossip at school. Some classmates called her crazy for thinking she could beat the system. Others secretly rooted for her, slipping her encouraging notes in the hallway. Teachers, too, watched with conflicted eyes, unsure whether to treat her as a student or as the girl whose courage was making national news. At home, bills piled high. Jamal's absence left them on the brink of losing their apartment. Layla tried to cook simple meals, though she often forgot to eat herself. One night, she broke down in the dark, whispering into her pillow that maybe she wasn't enough. But in the morning she would rise again, her notebook in hand, determined to keep pushing. The trial gained media frenzy. Civil rights activists filled the benches, chanting outside the courthouse. "Justice for Jamal!" rang through the streets. But with attention came threats. Anonymous letters warned the Carters to drop it or face consequences. Layla's phone buzzed with hateful messages calling her delusional, telling her to go back to knowing her place. Instead of silencing her, it steeled her resolve. The real breakthrough came when Layla obtained subpoenaed emails between Richard Price, the firm's senior partner, and Holt. The messages were damning. In one, Richard wrote, "If the merger documents are gone, we need someone expendable to blame. Make sure Carter's card shows up in the logs." The courtroom erupted in chaos as the email was read aloud. The prosecutor objected, claiming context was missing. But the words were plain. The executives had orchestrated the entire scheme. Jamal looked at his daughter with tears streaming down his cheeks. For years, he had felt invisible. Now his child was forcing the world to see not just him, but the injustice behind countless others like him. Still, the fight was far from over. Richard himself was called to testify, and he strutted to the stand like a man untouchable. With a calm smile, he claimed the emails were taken out of context and that Jamal had always been unreliable. He oozed arrogance, confident that wealth and connections would protect him. But Layla was relentless. She confronted him with contradictions in his statements. She revealed surveillance footage from a neighboring building showing Richard entering the office during the supposed time of the theft, footage the firm had failed to mention. She asked him why, if the files were so valuable, the merger they referenced had already been canceled weeks earlier. Richard's composure cracked. He grew defensive, stumbling over explanations. The gallery watched, stunned, as a 14-year-old dismantled a powerful lawyer's lies piece by piece. By the end of that day, the courtroom was no longer laughing at Layla Carter. They were listening, they were questioning, and the system itself seemed to tremble under the weight of a teenager's voice refusing to be silenced. But for Layla, the battle wasn't just about proving her father innocent. It was about proving that the system, designed to crush people like them, could be challenged. That a black girl from Detroit could stand toe-to-toe with men in $1,000 suits and expose the cracks in their armor. She walked out of the courthouse as cameras flashed, and a reporter shouted, "Layla, do you think you've already won?" She didn't pause. She didn't smile. She simply said, "Winning isn't enough. I want the truth." And with those words, she set the stage for the final confrontation that would shake not only the courtroom, but the city itself. The air inside the courtroom the next morning felt like it carried electricity. Reporters filled every seat, their cameras poised, while activists lined the halls chanting for justice. Everyone knew this was the day things would break wide open. Either the system would crush a working-class black man to protect the powerful, or a teenage girl's unrelenting courage would rewrite the narrative. Richard Price, the senior partner of Hamilton and Price, sat on the stand with a smirk carved into his face. He had weathered decades of lawsuits and scandals, and he believed this was just another storm he could ride out. The prosecutor still clung to the story of Jamal's guilt, insisting the evidence was compelling. but the cracks Layla had exposed were too large to plaster over. When the judge called on her to cross-examine Richard, Layla walked forward with steady steps, her blazer sleeves rolled to the elbows. She looked small compared to the towering lawyers around her, but her voice carried the weight of every sleepless night, every whispered legal definition, every tear she had hidden in the dark. "Mr. Price," she began calmly, "you testified yesterday that the missing documents were worth millions, correct?" "Yes," he said smoothly. "And yet," she continued, sliding a sheet of paper onto the evidence table, "this internal memo from your firm, dated 3 weeks before the alleged theft, confirms the merger those documents pertain to had already been canceled. Isn't that right?" Richard blinked, his smirk faltering. That's not relevant." "Not relevant?" Layla's voice sharpened. "You accused my father of stealing documents that had no value. You told this court he had motive when in reality the only person with motive was you, because those documents could expose your embezzlement scheme." Gasps spread through the gallery. Richard's face flushed red. The judge raised a hand. "Ms. Carter, be careful with your accusations." But Layla pressed forward. "No, Your Honor. The truth has been hidden too long. Mr. Price framed my father because he caught him shredding financial records in the office that night. My father didn't steal anything. He witnessed a crime, and for that, they tried to destroy him." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, reporters scribbling furiously. Richard sputtered, denying everything, but then Layla produced the final blow, an email chain subpoenaed from the firm's servers, where Richard instructed Holt to clean up the logs and make sure Carter takes the fall. The judge's gavel slammed, demanding order. Richard's lawyer shouted objections, but the words were meaningless. The evidence spoke for itself. At that moment, the prosecutor's shoulders slumped. He whispered to his team, then stood to announce, "The state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Carter." The sound of those words hit Jamal like thunder. For weeks, he had been trapped in a nightmare, branded a thief, humiliated in front of his daughter. Now, tears streamed down his face as the cuffs were removed and he stood free at last. The gallery burst into applause, though the judge struggled to quiet them. Holt was escorted out in handcuffs, pale and shaking. Richard Price shouted furiously at the bailiffs, threatening to ruin everyone, but his words carried no power anymore. He was ordered into custody for perjury and fraud. Jamal turned to his daughter, pulling her into his arms. He whispered, "You saved me, baby. You saved me." But Layla, trembling with relief, shook her head. "No, Daddy." "The truth saved you. I just made them see it." News of the trial spread like wildfire. National outlets replayed clips of Layla's cross-examinations, dubbing her the teenage defender. Social media lit up with praise, hashtags demanding reform, and videos of people cheering in Detroit's streets. Yet behind the spotlight, the Carters faced a different kind of reckoning. Jamal was offered his old job back, this time as a supervisor, but he hesitated. Returning to the place that had tried to bury him felt like swallowing poison. He told Layla quietly, "They wanted me invisible. They don't get to own my future anymore." Instead, with support from community groups and donations pouring in, Jamal and Layla began speaking at churches, schools, and neighborhood centers. They told their story not for fame, but to shine light on others who had been silenced. One janitor after another came forward with stories of harassment, intimidation, and wrongful accusations. The case had cracked open a vault of systemic abuse. One evening, after a long day of interviews, Jamal sat on their worn sofa with Layla beside him. He looked at her not just as his daughter, but as something larger, a symbol of resilience he hadn't realized was growing under his own roof. "You've given people hope," he said softly. Layla leaned against his shoulder. "I just didn't want to lose you." "You didn't just keep me," he replied. "You changed me." You made me believe we can fight back. The Attorney General's office launched an investigation into Hamilton and Price, uncovering years of corruption. Richard Price's empire crumbled, his wealth stripped, his name disgraced. Holt, faced with overwhelming evidence, pled guilty and confessed to falsifying logs at Richard's command. The law firm itself nearly collapsed under lawsuits, and for once, justice felt like more than just a word. But the story didn't end in the courtroom. Months later, Layla stood on the stage at a youth justice conference, her braids swinging as she spoke to an audience of law students, professors, and young activists. She told them that the law wasn't just dusty books or expensive suits. It was a tool anyone could wield if they had the courage to learn. She reminded them that wrongful convictions were not rare accidents, but symptoms of a system that too often preyed on the poor and the powerless. Her voice shook at first, but then it rose steady and clear. Justice shouldn't depend on the size of your paycheck or the color of your skin. It should depend on truth. And truth is something even a 14-year-old can fight for. The audience rose in a standing ovation, clapping until their hands ached. Jamal, sitting in the front row, wiped away tears, his chest swelling with pride. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a janitor, not as an accused man, but as the father of a girl who refused to bow. Even Richard Price, watching from his prison cell as the speech was broadcast on the evening news, lowered his head in regret. For the first time, stripped of power and status, he saw the humanity of the man he tried to destroy and the brilliance of the daughter he underestimated. He wrote letters of apology from behind bars, though Layla never replied. Forgiveness, she knew, was a long road, but at least he finally admitted what he had done. In the end, the Carters moved to a better neighborhood, not out of vanity, but necessity. Jamal found work as a maintenance manager at a community center, where his skills were valued and his dignity respected. Layla balanced school with advocacy, working on cases of other teenagers whose parents had been wrongfully accused. She started a network called Youth for Justice, a place where kids could learn their rights and fight for their families. At night, when the world quieted, Jamal would still worry about bills, about the next challenge life might throw. But then he'd hear his daughter in the next room, reading case law aloud to herself, her voice steady, relentless. And he knew they would be okay, because the story of the Carters wasn't just about one trial. It was about proving that resilience could break through walls built by prejudice. It was about showing that courage could bloom in the unlikeliest places. A girl at a kitchen table, scribbling notes by the light of a single bulb. And it was about reminding everyone watching, from Detroit to beyond, that justice isn't something handed down by the powerful. It's something demanded by the brave. So as the video fades, I ask you this. What did you feel as you followed Layla's fight? Do you believe that age, status, or money should determine who gets a fair shot at truth? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Like this video if it moved you, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories of courage, resilience, and hope. Because justice is not a privilege. Justice is a right. And sometimes, it takes the voice of a child to remind us all.